Good morning. Welcome to another fresh edition of your program Inside Nigeria. My name is Winifred Webo, and today is Monday, August 25th, 2025. On today's show, we are looking at what the newspapers are saying in this first segment of the show, newspaper review. And of course, we have Nigeria's most influential newspaper as the starting paper for today. That is the kickoff. And the leadership's leading story today says mixed reactions as Sultan says justice becoming purchasable commodity. Mixed reactions as Sultan says justice becoming purchasable commodity. He says the poor are becoming victims of this kind of justice, while the rich commit all manner of crimes and walk the streets scot-free. Quote from the Sultan's speech at the conference of Nigerian Bar Association opening conference in Enugu State yesterday. Let's take some excerpts from that leading story and, of course, get the grip or the background for the Sultan of Sokoto's remarks. The Sultan of Sokoto, Muhammadu Said Abubakar III, has warned that justice in Nigeria is increasingly becoming a purchasable commodity where the poor are victims and the rich evade accountability. The Sultan, who spoke as a guest speaker at the Nigerian Bar Association NBA Annual General Conference in Enugu on Sunday, warned that corruption and inequality are undermining the integrity of the judicial system. Today, justice is increasingly becoming a purchasable commodity, and the poor are becoming victims of this kind of justice, while the rich commit all manner of crime and walk the streets cost-free, he said. He, however, commended the NBA for choosing the theme Stand Out and Stand Tall, saying it aligns with the urgent need for lawyers to deliver on their professional mandate. We just took excerpts from today's leading cover story on Leadership newspaper, mixed reactions as Sultan says justice become purchasable commodity. There are other stories gracing the cover of Leadership newspaper this morning. Of course, we'll take them one after the other. The Benue Assembly gets new speaker, and that story is on page 7 of Leadership. Government key man, wife, 5 others in Imo. 6 dead, 9 rescued, 3 missing in Fresh Sokoto boat accident. That story continues on page 30 of the paper. Ibom Air versus Emerson, Governor Eno sues for peace, promises compensation. After 3 mixed deadlines, NNPC sets November for AKK projects completion. And that takes us towards the masthead of the paper, where we bet at the business boss. DMO project single-digit inflation by 2027. The Debt Management Office has projected that Nigeria's inflation rate will decline steadily to below 10% by 2027. This comes as the country unveils its new debt strategy, which aims to curb risk and ensure fiscal sustainability over the medium term. The projection contained in the newly approved medium-term debt management strategy, MTDS 2024-27, signals cautious optimism that ongoing fiscal and monetary reforms will tame the country's surging prices. Excerpts from the business story on the business buzz of Leadership. DMO projects single-digit inflation by 2027. From there, we go to the stories above the masthead. Nigeria and South Africa should forge economic partnership, coming from Malema. And just lastly, on the cover, NLC rejects proposed pay rise for political office holders. Of course, the proposed increase or pay rise for political holders by RMAFC has continued to generate controversies and crises since the intention was made public. This on that note, we go to page 3 of Leadership for our stand. And today's stand says EFCC deserves praise, not litigation. Today's stand in Leadership. EFCC deserves praise, not litigation. It says the recent controversy surrounding the arrest of 93 suspected internet fraudsters at a hotel within the Olusegun Obasanjo Presidential Library complex has unfortunately overshadowed what should be celebrated as exemplary law enforcement work. While the library management's demand for 3.5 billion naira in compensation and a public apology is understandable, given the circumstances, we must not lose sight of the bigger picture. Nigeria is fighting an existential battle against cybercrime that threatens to permanently damage the country's international standing and corrupt an entire generation of young people. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission's clarification that the Presidential Library was not the target, but rather a hotel within its precinct where suspected fraudsters were celebrating their alleged exploits should put the matter in proper perspective. We move towards the conclusion of today's stand. It says the library as an institution associated with leadership and national development should instead partner with law enforcement agencies in the fight against cybercrime rather than creating obstacles through litigation. We urge the Obasanjo Presidential Library management to reconsider their demand for compensation and public apology from the EFCC. While their concerns about property rights and corporate image are valid, they pale in comparison to the national crisis that cybercrime represents. These are excerpts from today's stand in Leadership, our stand. And today's stand is on EFCC deserves praise, not litigation. Of course, the trending story, recent report was when EFCC invaded President Olusegun Obasanjo's library, where some fraudsters, suspected internet fraudsters, were arrested, 93 of them actually. However, after the fallout, the management of Olusegun Obasanjo Presidential Library Complex threatened a 3.5 billion defamation suit and public apology. That is where today's stand is the foundation for today's stand. EFCC deserves praise, not litigation. From the stand, we move to the back page as we normally do. And of course, today's Monday column is with Dakuku Peter's side. Last week he was away, but today he's writing on remembering Nigerians victims of terror. Monday column with Dakuku Peter's side, remembering Nigeria's victims of terror. In quote, community guards require training, insurance, and clear rules of engagement to prevent them from becoming targets without protection or morphing into militias without accountability. Quote from Monday's column with Dakuku Peter's side, remembering Nigeria's victims of terror. Before we leave the back page, let's visit Ghana Must Go. Article says, I'm not desperate to be president. And of course, Ghana Must Go replied, I laugh in Fufu Day, because you have to laugh in English. It's on that note we conclude review of Leadership newspaper this Monday. Don't forget to log into the website of Leadership for continuation of those headline stories, inside stories, and of course, the stand. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is we move to this next paper we have on our lineup, and that is Punch newspaper. Punch leading story today says, sick and stranded. Presidential order fails to curb soaring drug prices. Leading story on today's Punch newspaper. Sick and stranded. Sick and stranded. Presidential order fails to curb soaring drug prices. Essential medicines still unaffordable despite tax waivers. Pharmacies struggle amid weak naira. Kickers to the leading story. Still on the Punch, Elias ally emerges new Benue Assembly Speaker as Dajo resigns. Also one of the leading stories on today's Leadership. Kidnap kingpin captured in Nasarawa as police arrest six suspects. Federal government begins phase 2 of 12,000 megawatt CMS power projects. And from there, we move to the masthead. Beside it, Yoruba leaders push for Makinde Adeleke's intervention in Alafin Oni conflicts. Above the masthead of the Punch, PDP NEC gets zoning report today amid convention crisis. Locals beg federal government as Osun Ondo federal roads crumble. And that concludes the review of front headline stories on the Punch this Monday. For more, don't forget to log into the website of the Punch newspaper. We move ahead to the next story. To the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is the Daily Times. Daily Times leading story says NLC to ROMAFC hot politicians pay increase or risk national opera. That story continues on page 2 of the Daily Times. It's also one of the leading stories on leadership newspaper. NLC to ROMAFC hot politicians pay increase or risk national opera. Still on the Daily Times, investors lose 2.29 trillion naira in 1 week as naira extends losing streak. That same story is also the main story on Vanguard newspaper Monday. However, we'll continue on the stories gracing the cover of the Daily Times. Security agencies deserve better working environments, coming from Senate President Akpabio. Olubadan designates Ladoja tax family heads on security in Ibadan. North Central Group demands presidential ticket from PDP, ADC, SDP. KWSG to prioritize Fulani herders' children education to end insecurity. Data 2027, Omoagege urged not to run against Obore Wuri. And that takes us to this soul or lone story above the masthead of Daily Times. Enemies within sponsored fake news campaign against NNPC leadership group. And is on that note we conclude review of the Daily Times newspaper this Monday. For more, log into the website of the Daily Times. We move to the next paper on our lineup, and that is Vanguard. Vanguard's leading story says economy, industrialization in jeopardy as agri manufacturing sink. Our services sector takes driving seat. Manufacturing loses 1.2 trillion naira in 5 years, according to reports. FDI plummets amid waning investors' confidence. Rebasing exposes sector's structural weakness. Manufacturers Association of Nigeria MAN. Nigeria struggling with deindustrialization, says NESG. Manufacturing should contribute 40% to GDP, according to ECBO. These are kickers to the leading story on today's Vanguard newspaper. Economy, industrialization in jeopardy as agri manufacturing sink. For continuation of that cover story, it continues on page 19 of the paper. Labour tackles federal government over proposed pay rise for political office holders. Labour tackles federal government over proposed pay rise for political office holders. That story is on page 8 of Vanguard. Falana to EFCC, return recovered 32.7 billion naira, $445,000 loot to NSIPA. AGC to Tinubu declared state of emergency in Katsina, Zamfara over insecurity. Imported steel products drain over $4 billion foreign exchange annually, Minister. Governor Abdulrazak declares war on kidnappers, bandits after deadly attack. And that takes us to the stories above the masthead of Vanguard. U-Tide, 131% surge in airfares to southeast, south sparks passengers outcry. That story is on page 9 of Vanguard. U-Tide, 131% surge in airfares to southeast, south sparks passengers outcry. Insecurity, concerned stakeholders decry killing of 10,217 persons in just 2 years. Gridlock, Lagos halts work on Ogudu Ifako Bridge. NBA conference, Sultan Malema tax lawyers on justice, protection of poor. That forms the leading story on leadership newspaper this Monday. It's on that note we conclude review of front headline stories on Vanguard. For more, log into the website of Vanguard newspaper. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is The Guardian. The Guardian says Malema, Africa's future dependent on political economy in Nigeria, South Africa. The story continues on page 6 of The Guardian. Coalition, ADC warned of looming security collapse, urged Tinubu to act. Federal government 1 trillion naira needed yearly to sustain school feeding program. NNPC deducts 235.6 billion naira in 7 months for oil search in North Frontier basins. Yoruba elders appeal to Ooni Alafin to end rifts. NMA Lagos threatens solidarity strike over unpaid salaries, welfare. Benue Speaker resigns 48 hours after suspending 4 lawmakers. ROMAFC under fire over upward review of politicians' remuneration. It takes us to the stories just beneath the masthead of The Guardian. US Obasanjo flee judiciary over perceived grafts. El-Rufai opposition leaders collapse Kaduna SDP into ADC. And lastly, on the cover of The Guardian, NLNG sees part with gas suppliers to aid production expansion. For more, log into the website of The Guardian for continuation of these headline stories. From The Guardian, we move to our sister publication, and that is National Economy. National Economy is a weekly business newspaper on the stable of Leadership Newspaper Limited. And this week's cover story in print says, fraudulent visa agents, Nigeria risk creating 50 billion naira parallel shadow fraud economy. Experts say country lacks licensing framework for migration consultants. Demand decisive action from government as citizens lose billions to Japa syndrome. Fraudulent visa agents, Nigeria risk creating 50 billion naira parallel shadow fraud economy. Experts say country lacks licensing framework for migration consultants. Demand decisive action from government as citizens lose billions to Japa syndrome. Of course, we also have the stories of people traveling with their traveling bags underneath the leading story this week. And the story says Nigeria is on the brink of nurturing a 50 billion naira shadow fraud economy as fake visa agents and unlicensed migration consultants exploit the desperation of citizens caught in the Japa rush, experts have warned. According to them, with no licensing framework to regulate migration services in the country, fraudsters are turning mass immigration into a black market enterprise that has left victims bankrupt, stranded, and psychologically broken. An investigation by National Economy reveals a disturbing rise in fraudulent travel schemes. Unregistered agents posing as relocation experts promise work permits, study visas, or residency packages in Europe and North America, often charging millions upfront only to disappear or hand victims forged documents that collapse at foreign airports. These are excerpts on the cover of Leadership of National Economy. Fraudulent visa agents, Nigeria risk creating 50 billion naira parallel shadow fraud economy, coming from experts. Still on National Economy, X-raying financial toll of Nigeria's high fertility rate. The story runs on page 12 of National Economy, and above the masthead, NAMA commences audit of Nigerian airspace. First time since 2021, Nigeria's forest reserves hit $41 billion. And those stories continue on pages 5 of the paper. It's on that note we conclude review of front headline stories on National Economy, Leadership's sister publication this Monday. And for continuation of these headline stories, you log on to the website of National Economy, www.nationaleconomy.com. Well, viewers, all too soon, our newspaper review on our show Inside Nigeria has actually come to an end. Don't forget to log into the website of those papers, and especially that of Leadership, for continuation of those headline stories. My name is Winifred Ugbebo. Same time tomorrow is another opportunity for a fresh program of Inside Nigeria. Don't also forget to join us on this same frequency for news on the hour. Thanks for joining us once again.
Be part of our brand. Leadership for God and country.